Weintraub. I am the product manager for ArcGIS Workflow Manager. I'm joined by Arthi Dwarkanath. She's our lead product engineer. Hello. And Ashley Dupati. She'll be our moderator today.
Hello.
We're going to cover quite a few topics. We'll start with an overview of what Workflow Manager is, and we're going to discuss the underlying architecture. Next, we'll highlight key functionality and provide a little more insight into what's possible by taking a look at 3 common use cases that we often see implemented. These are submission and approval, data editing, and automated orchestration. Then we'll take a look at how these workflows are built, how work can be monitored and managed, and then wrap up with some of our future roadmap items. The remaining time will be set aside for a brief Q&A session at the end. So Workflow Manager is a scalable work management system, and it provides a framework to guide your users through streamlined workflows while encouraging adherence to both standards and best practices. We often refer to it as the conductor in your ArcGIS environment because it orchestrates both of your GIS and non-GIS processes. So let's take a look at a simple, repeatable process. It generally follows this 4-stage pattern that we have here. You'll have work that's submitted, it gets reviewed, it gets handed out to one or multiple people to complete the work, and then of course you have your deliverables that get created and sent out. So for any established process, it's easy for an organization to complete it once or even a handful of times a day or a week. But what happens when you try scaling it up? Maybe you need to do it hundreds of times or thousands of times. And then what happens when you get those short-term surges of activity that may overwhelm your resources? You'll start to see the bottlenecks get magnified, processes can start to slow down, you'll see more mistakes happening and overall quality dropping. Other challenges that we hear from customers: ambiguous requirements. So maybe you don't gather all of the necessary information to complete that work and you'll have to go back and forth. It's just wasted time and sometimes confusion. Inconsistent deliveries. If you have multiple people working on the same type of job, you want to make sure that every customer is getting the same type of deliverable for that job. Duplication of effort, a lack of auditability. They want to be able to track and have a history of the work that's been done even after those jobs are closed. And then loss of knowledge. So when you have people leaving the organization, maybe they're retiring or just out unexpectedly. So how do you maintain the same quality, standards, and productivity in the face of these pain points? And this is where Workflow Manager comes in to streamline and automate those production processes and act as your orchestration factory to keep things running smoothly. Some of the specific benefits include improved data quality. So having a centralized system to manage work and spatial information, along with the ability to build in quality control steps to every process, Workflow Manager helps to maintain data quality and integrity. This ties into the next point. So when an organization designs and uses a process that everyone follows, it's predictable, it can be monitored, and it's easier to see and act on problems when they arise. Knowing that everyone is working through the different job types the same way increases trust and reduces the overall risks. We not only want to make managing work easier, but we also want to provide a smooth experience for the users. We don't want this to be something else that they have to tackle on the day-to-day. So by automating the tedious, manual, and repetitive steps that they have to do, users can focus on those tasks that truly need their eyes or hands-on attention while other work is still getting completed. They'll feel and be more productive, which ultimately leads into increased productivity for the organization. So by resolving issues with bottlenecks, process management, and workforce coordination through automation, the result is an increase in productivity. And it can be realized in a number of different ways. It really depends on the organization and what they've identified as pain points, what they've identified as priorities, and what they're really looking to improve. By capturing the business processes, we're also capturing the tradecraft that goes into it. So it's easier to onboard new staff and get them working faster, and it's not so devastating to lose one. I often get people in a panic because somebody's retiring that's been there for 30 years and they're not quite sure that everyone knows what they know. And they just want to make sure that they have that in a system or somewhere that everyone else can follow. And then, of course, what makes us different, because there are a lot of different types of work management systems out there. We have two things, basically. We have the geographic approach. We care about the work's location. We want you to use it effectively in analysis and reporting, and we want you to not have to duplicate it. We don't want it to have to be in multiple systems. We want to tie in, and that's point number 2. We are tightly integrated with ArcGIS technology, so you can use your existing GIS data. Over time, we have come across a lot of different possible use cases for Workflow Manager. We have scenarios like data submission, editing on various networks, simple data editing, address and boundary adjustments, and many, many more. It really highlights the flexibility of Workflow Manager and makes the point that we are a horizontal product and then have the ability to support use cases that are cross-cutting and they're not industry specific. So it's kind of hard. That's when people ask about templates, and there are many different ways to use Workflow Manager. So for our demos today, Arthi is going to be focusing on 2 types of use cases. The first one is going to be editing on an LRS or location referencing network, and the second is going to be an inspection request review. I did want to mention before we move on about our latest case study that we have with SCAG, or the Southern California Association of Governments. I think they're doing a presentation right now, actually, but we have a case study that's published out there, and they implemented Workflow Manager. They have workflows that were built as part of their regional data platform to directly address the need to streamline processes for collecting and integrating data from their local jurisdictions. They have 197 cities and counties that submit data edits to them, and they needed a way to handle all of that coming in and ensure quality control is being met. So if you would like to know more about the problem with SCAG and what they're facing, as well as the solution that they implemented, you can read all about it in the case study, and I'll have the link in the resources slide at the end. But I did want to just highlight that. Okay, so let's move into the architecture, or how Workflow Manager fits into ArcGIS Enterprise. We're very excited to announce that we now have 2 deployment options for you. So Workflow Manager is available in ArcGIS Enterprise, and here in the next few weeks, we will have Workflow Manager available in ArcGIS Online. We've kept the business model very similar between the 2 deployments. It's a capability server in ArcGIS Enterprise and an organizational capability extension in ArcGIS Online. We have 2 levels of Workflow Manager functionality. So for Enterprise on the capability server and for the online organizational extensions, we have a standard option which provides access to out-of-the-box features to design workflow diagrams, manage and track all jobs in your system, and complete those assigned tasks. And then we have the advanced capability, which includes all of the standard functionality, but it also unlocks the ability to incorporate even more automation into your workflows through job and step scheduling, advanced email configuration options, automated job activities, and more. We also have a web application, which is the main interface for Workflow Manager. This is where you're going to interact with your workflow item and workflows, and where you'll administer those. You'll have jobs that can be managed there, and this is where work can also be performed. We have a Pro extension available for those that primarily work through jobs on the desktop side. So if your editors work in Pro, they don't have to go into a web application to get their job to start a step. They can access their jobs from a panel in Pro and complete their work there. And finally, we do have a Python, a REST, and JavaScript API available for extensibility options. So some of the technical distinguishing characteristics that enhance the benefits of using Workflow Manager. As I mentioned, it's a service-driven architecture, which means you have the real-time synchronization between work that's being performed on the web and on the desktop side and from mobile apps even. It allows for distributed workforces across different geographic locations to be able to easily work together. We're tightly integrated, let me hit the button, we're tightly integrated with ArcGIS Enterprise, which means organizations can use your existing apps, maps, data, users from your centralized portal. You don't have to manage a separate user store or data store, and you'll have better management and quality, as we mentioned earlier. Ease of use for the user. They're going to have these user-focused experiences that are simple. Again, not just another system or another product for them to learn, but hopefully it's complementary to their day and further increases their job satisfaction. The apps are extremely extremely responsive, and again, just moving from a desktop-based product to the services-based product, there's a huge increase in performance, but you're also going to have that increase in productivity in this management system. And then we do listen to the user feedback. We really like to hear how things are working, what the pain points are for people, and what they're looking to be able to do. And we're always looking into new features. So some of our recent additions include advanced web request options, enhancements to job access in Pro, what users can do there, and even more webhook configuration opportunities. And we have more coming up in future releases, and I'll talk about some of those when we go over the roadmap slide in a bit. So let's dive into the demos. We'll see Workflow Manager in action, and you guys can see some use cases here that Arthi's put together. The first demo that we're going to go over is a submission and approval type of workflow. It's commonly used in permitting, incident reporting, data submission, and other digital requests. These are great examples of the 4-stage pattern that I mentioned earlier, and a pretty common type of process that we see with a lot of our users. The use case usually differs, and they have different requirements, but at the heart of it, it's going to be a submission and approval workflow. Arthi is going to walk through a stormwater illicit discharge inspection request using Workflow Manager in ArcGIS Online. She will determine whether it is valid and create a task for the field crew to go out and perform the inspection. Over to you, Arthi.
Thank you, Tiffany. For our first demo, we're going to be accessing Workflow Manager in ArcGIS Online. Once your workflow license is configured, you can easily access the... Oh, can you push?
I hit it.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Says on the phone.
I don't know. Pause.
Yeah.
We're working now?
I don't know. Oh, there it goes.
Oh,
It's working.
there.
All right.
It's loose.
So yes, so our first demo, we're going to be accessing Workflow Manager in ArcGIS Online. So once your licenses are set up, you can find Workflow Manager icon in your app launcher. And once you click on it, you're going to be taken to an open item page. So you'll see I already have multiple items created here. Think of workflow items as containers that hold workflows specific to, say, a department, and then all the users in your organization work together to complete these workflows. I'll open the item that I created for our session today, and once we're in, we're taken to the Manage page. And we'll come back to the Manage page towards the end of this session. We're going to start on the Work page. I'm logged in as an admin user where I have access to all the different tabs and all the out-of-the-box capabilities. And you'll see how that changes as my role changes during our session. On the Work page, this is where a user like me would come in and find, filter, and run work that is assigned to me. The Work page is easily organized to find jobs that are assigned to me, my groups, or all the open other jobs in my system. I can further filter them using these out-of-the-box filters. I can find high priority jobs by clicking on high priority, jobs that were created in the past 24 hours, or jobs that are past their due date. As a user, I can go to these jobs and look for jobs that have already been created and continue working on them by clicking on the Start Step button. Today, we'll create a new request. I just got a physical request for an inspection for an illicit discharge that was reported by a business nearby. Workflow Manager will automatically update and take me to the new job that we just created. My first step is to define the location where that illicit discharge was reported. I can do so by using these tools. And a job's location can be a point, a polyline, or a polygon. And you can define either existing feature as your job's location or create a new feature to be your job's location. Next, I'll fill out some job information relevant to the job. In Workflow Manager, we call them extended properties. These are basically attribute values that are stored as part of the job. We'll give it a second here. You'll see that my status has already been changed to in progress, and it's set to read only. That means I can't change that. You'll also notice that the proceed button is grayed out, which means I can't move on to the next step. This is because I have some fields that are required here. So I'll go ahead and fill those out really quickly. And the proceed button's enabled now. This ensures that incomplete information is not submitted for processes like these. While we're going to the next step, I want to draw your attention to the Jobs Detail panel. The Job Detail panel dynamically updates to show you the latest information about the job. You can see the priority of this job, who it's assigned to, what the status is, and the extended properties that we just filled out. Now, we understand that extended properties don't always satisfy the complex requirements that you might have for your project. And for that, you can easily integrate with a Survey 123 form. This form was configured by my workflow administrator that just opened it in Workflow Manager. So we'll go ahead and fill that information out. We'll describe the type of discharge that was reported, and I'll put a signed signature in here. Just like the extended property, this information will now be stored as part of this job and can be accessed in the Job Details panel. Other information that can be accessed in the Job Details panel is the diagram. This is the graphical representation of the process that is being followed as part of this job. You can expand it. You can see the current step that we're on is Add Attachment. It also tells me who it's assigned to. As part of the physical request, I received a picture that I just scanned. I'm going to add it to the job so the inspection crew has access to it when they start working on this job in the future. This is an embedded attachment that gets stored in the data stored. If you have really large attachments, you can also link your FTP drives or your OneDrive links to the job. The application is responding to the different step types our workflow administrator has designed for this process. While Workflow Manager loads the next step, let's take a look at a couple of other tabs in here. So the attachment that I just added is now available for anybody that's looking in the job on the Job Details panel. And this is probably my favorite tab. The job history records every action that has been taken place in the job. It tells you information about who performed the task, how much time did it take. It's like a living history document that you can access even months after the job has been closed. Next, I'll answer a question. I'll say yes, and I'll say that this is approved for inspection, so it can move on to the inspection crew. Comments are a good way to communicate extra information about the job, and you can see them here in the Comments tab. You can see the user that added the comment, what was said in that comment, the date, and the time when it was added. Next, Workflow Manager is automatically sending an email to the business that reported this illicit discharge and letting them know that it's going on to the next step and they should be expecting an inspection crew to visit over the next few days. This step will create a new job for the inspection crew in their work order system. In this example, we're using Workflow Manager as the base for the field order crew, but you can really create new work orders for your field crew in any system. And once that job has been created, our current job has been put on hold because it's now dependent on that inspection. Once the field crew finishes their inspection, this dependency will be automatically released, and I'll be able to put in the inspection details in this job. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right. Thanks, Arthi. So you saw a bit of the submission process, a preliminary review of the request information, and even a child job being created that's automatically tasking the field crew that will go out and perform that inspection. Think about all the ways that people ask for information or for work to be done in your organization. Is there a standardized intake process? Does it go through a vetting process? How do you task the people that need to do the work? If you really assess each of these scenarios, you'll realize how common this type of workflow is in your organization. You might remember Arthi manually put in the additional information for the request, but it could have been collected through another application like Survey 123 or Field Maps in the beginning and programmatically added to the job. That's a later session. All right, so let's move on to our next demo. For this one, we're going to use Workflow Manager in ArcGIS Enterprise, where Arthi is going to be performing edits on an LRS or location referencing network. Workflow Manager supports service-driven data structures and can orchestrate workflows across Pro and the web seamlessly. A typical data editing workflow usually contains a number of steps that need to be carried out, and these tasks include defining the work location, creating and/or claiming a version, editing data, quality control checks, and posting that data back to default. These will likely be assigned to multiple people from different teams as the job progresses. So in Arthi's route update demo, you'll see just how Workflow Manager easily guides the user through these steps, reassigns the job between different groups and users, and with very little intervention.
Thanks, Tiffany. So we're back on the work page, this time in Enterprise. I access Workflow Manager the same way I did in ArcGIS Online by going to my app launcher. My GIS manager, I'm logged in as a GIS editor this time, as Tiffany. I already have a few jobs in my job queue. The GIS manager already created a job for me, defined the location where I need to make my edits, and created a version for me. You'll notice that my work page looks a little bit different than it did in my previous demo. This is because I don't have access to all the jobs in the system. My experience in the app is tailored to match my job's responsibilities as a GIS editor. This step already has a pro project that was configured by my workflow administrator to open a project from Portal with predefined maps and tasks. To save time, I already have this project open here. You can see the workflow pane here is automatically pointed to the job that I'm currently working on. When I ran the Open Pro Item step, there are a few things that Workflow Manager did for me. It opened a map, zoomed into the location, opened a task, and repointed all of my layers to my job's version. Workflow Manager did all of the heavy lifting so I can focus on my edits. I'll use the task to walk through and help me navigate through Pro. I also have all of my Pro tools for linear referencing and location referencing that I can use to help with my edits. So we'll start off with creating a record. I'll use the Create tool, Create Feature tool to add some ownership data. Next, I'll go ahead and add attribute values for our feature. Once done, we can move on to our next step to save the edits. And once I'm done with my edits, I can go back to the Workflow Manager pane and close or finish my step. And as part of finishing the step, Workflow Manager will save those edits and close out my map. You'll also notice that my next step was automatically started for me. I'll cancel this for a second just so I can show you around Workflow Manager in Pro. You can access the Workflow Manager pane by going to the View tab and looking for the Workflow Manager icon. This is how you open it. On My Jobs, I have the same filters that I had on the work page to filter work based on their priority, their due date, and jobs that were created in the past 24 hours. If I wanted to get more details on the job, I could go back to the job details panel. This gives me all of the information about the priority of the job, who it's assigned to, what type of job it is, and the status. We can also see some extended properties that was added. There's some comments that will be available here if there were any comments. I think if I go back to my job, I may have a comment here. Yeah. So my workflow administrator that created the data for me left a comment for me here to give me additional information about my jobs. I can also add attachments like I did in my first session that I can access in Pro to help with my work. All right. So before I move on to the next step, I want to show you the workflow app in the web and the workflow app in Pro side by side. All right. So job 20 is what we're on. As soon as I start my job 20, you can see the web app also updates at the same time. This is what the real-time syncing is. So no matter where you are, whether you're in Pro or whether you're in the web app, you're always in sync and you see all the same information, all the same data that is being shared across your organization. I'll go ahead and say, I think my edit looks great, so I'm going to send it off to a QC. An email was automatically sent to my QC person to review my edits. I have an example of an email here. I wasn't sure if I could get it just because of the Wi-Fi being slow, but I have an example here that has information about my edits, my job details that was automatically populated using Arcade Expression dynamically. I also have a link that I can click on that will directly take me to my job. All right, sorry about that. Got lost with my tabs. All right, so here we are back in Workflow Manager. This time I'm logged in as myself as a GIS and a QC administrator. Tiffany's edits have been sent back to me and the job is now ready for me to be worked on. As part of the analysis or the review process, I'll be making some adds to my events layer. Workflow Manager automatically opened up Event Editor within Workflow Manager. I have my job details pane here with all of the information that was added as part of this job, and I can minimize it if I want to focus in Event Editor. A couple of nice things about using Workflow Manager to integrate these applications is that it automatically took me to the version for the job, and it automatically zoomed into my location where I can see all the edits that were made by Tiffany. Let's go ahead and add a quick event here. All right. I'm going to close out of Pro really quickly just so we can get rid of all of our locks. And there we go. Our event's been added. And I can easily go back to the Workflow Manager step by clicking Finish on this Event Editor step. Next, I've been asked to see if I want to reconcile and post my edits. So all the edits can be pushed back to our default layer, and everybody else that is editing in their versions can pull those edits into their versions. I'll go ahead and say yes. You'll notice that I don't have an option to run this step. That's because this step was automatically put on hold. That's a scheduled hold, different from what we saw in our previous session with the dependency. Schedule holds are great if you have really heavy operations that need to be run after hours. This hold will automatically be released at night when there's nobody else editing or using our data to make sure that there's minimum disruptions in their work. All of the information has been captured in the job details panel as Tiffany and I were going through the workflow. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right, thank you, Arthi. That was great. I can confirm that Tiffany needs all the help she can get in completing her work. So Workflow Manager seamlessly orchestrated work that moves between the web application and Pro. And did you notice how much of the manual repetitive preparation work was taken care of for the user? So to recap, there was an easy transfer of work responsibilities between the GIS manager, the editor, and the reviewer. The editor could see their work's location and no matter where they were working. The layers and tables were automatically set to the correct job version, and the task item was opened for them. We saw the synchronization between what is seen in Pro versus the web application. So those updates, you'll see them as they are happening. And then setting up step scheduling to delay certain actions that need to run outside of the peak work hours. By the way, all of this was done using out-of-the-box tools in Workflow Manager. None of this was custom. We didn't update any code or do anything to make that happen. So a lot of what we saw in the first two demos require human intervention or interaction, but it's possible to have purely automated workflows as well. Use cases like automated data processing can be easily achieved in Workflow Manager, where the users are only brought in on an as-needed basis. You can see the original 4-stage pattern I talked about earlier, but now some of the activities can be replaced with automated functionality. The submission of work could be via a web request, a webhook, or by monitoring your FTP sites or other data sources for those changes, which can create the job and move that data over. The review could use a geoprocessing service to check against set criteria and automatically accept or reject the submission based on the output of that assessment. Then completion could primarily be based on configured logic or a series of finishing tools, but may result in the job being reassigned to a user if there are issues that come up. So if you're trying to train a machine learning process or your automated attribute rule validation shows that there are more complex errors that can be automatically resolved, it can be pushed out to a user for them to look at and resolve it and move the job forward. So these concepts aren't for everyone. They tend to be for the larger systems, or if you just need to have a fully automated workflow or an orchestration system there in place of the people. A lot of use cases for this: data ingestion and data processing, collaboration processes, and request systems with high demand that have tight delivery turnarounds. One thing I'd like to note, if you're going to look at these fully automated workflows, is that it does require the advanced Workflow Manager server in Enterprise or the advanced organizational extension in ArcGIS Online to use some of this functionality. And if you'd like to learn more about the automation of workflows, we have a session tomorrow specifically targeted around these concepts. You can find more information about that session in the final slides that I have here, or later on in the slides. Okay, so now that we've seen some of the possible use cases and their processes, let's back up and talk about how those workflows were configured. How do you build workflows in Workflow Manager using the predefined steps, the types, and the step types, and the paths? Arthi's next demo will give you a glimpse into configuring some of these steps.
Thanks, Tiffany. So we've talked about how we've utilized the work created by a workflow administrator. Now let's take a step back and see how these are actually built. I'm now logged in as a GIS designer or a workflow designer. This is where I create, update, and view our different workflows that have been set up. The diagram was built all using out-of-the-box steps from our step library. For example, let's take a look at our route edits workflow that I just completed in Pro. The define location step pulled a web map from Portal directly. That's where I defined the location and defined the geometry type for my location. The version was a branch version that was created off of the feature layer that was published on Portal. Similarly, the Open Pro project item opened the task and the map that was specified for this particular step, and the Pro project was coming directly from Portal. I have some advanced tasks that I could have set up, like viewing Arrow Inspector when Pro opened my map, or running any other ArcGIS Pro commands that I wanted to help with my work. I can also stop users from editing outside the area of location by restricting their editing location. Next, an email was automatically sent to the QC person. This detail was pulled using arcade expressions. All of the information in the job was populated dynamically based on the information received from Workflow Manager. Similarly, when Event Editor zoomed into my area of location and my version, that was all done using Arcade. Next, we put a step on schedule. This was done using run on schedule on the step details. You can describe an expression describe the schedule using an arcade expression, or wait for a certain period of time, or wait until a specific time to run a step. Next, we'll take a look at our inspection review workflow in online. We opened a Survey 123 form. This form is on my online organization and was set up by the workflow administrator. You can have users have read-only access to the form when they open it in Workflow Manager, where they're only looking at the details and can't make any edits. I was editing the form, so I opened it in edit mode. We answered some questions. Now, if I had said no on the information not being complete, this information would have been sent back to the business directly to ask them for the missing data so we can move forward with the inspection request. We also created a child job for our field crew in here. There are other things that I can do on the design page. The extended properties that we filled out as part of this workflow all were set up on my job template here. There we go. You can define default values and define which attributes are editable, which are required. That dictated my proceed button to be enabled when I ran the step. All of this can be done here. Next, these are some of the out-of-the-box status types and priorities that we support, but you can add your own. You can add your own lookup types that you can use in your job. We also have this logs page to help you troubleshoot issues that you run into, failures that you run into when you're running your steps. And on the settings page, you can define the access for different users accessing the Workflow Manager apps. All of the users that you see in here are all coming from Portal or your ArcGIS Online org. I can give them access to Workflow Manager by assigning them workflow roles. And it works very similar to Enterprise, where you can give them access to only certain parts of the app. So when I logged in as a GIS editor, I only had access to my jobs. And that was defined on our shared searches. Here, you can either create your own searches or use one of the out-of-the-box ones that you see here. And I can further filter them out by sharing them only with certain groups. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right, thank you, Arthi. So it's pretty easy. It's more of a drag and drop functionality then to be able to build out your workflows, and you have that arcade ability to make them a little smarter, which is nice. And you can visualize the process, have people take a look, make sure everyone's good with it. And you can add more complexity and easily change these as you have more requirements that come in. So pretty cool. So now that you've seen how to design and build out the workflow diagrams, jobs being created and completed, now we want to show you how you can monitor and manage your work in the Workflow Manager system. We can do this using our Manage page. This is where a manager or a coordinator can go to check on the progress of all the jobs and see what's going on. They can use queries, those custom queries and searches that Arthi mentioned, but with the additional ability to be able to make changes. They can reassign the jobs to different users, to different groups, and it's kind of like an advanced dashboard for the coordinator. So it's not just a dashboard, but they can actually make changes and interact with the job. Arthy's going to step through the manage page for you.
Thanks, Tiffany. For our last section, as promised, we're back on the manage page. This time, I'm logged in as a coordinator or a project manager. And just like the work page, the manage page has been named after what it helps users do, which is manage. So as a coordinator, I can go to manage page to get an overall sense of all the work that is taking place in our organization. I can easily use the same out-of-the-box searches that I had on the work page to look at all the different jobs in our system. I can see them either as a list in here, or look at the locations for the job using the map that we have. All of the panels that you see can be collapsed here, depending on what you like to focus on. So if I just want to focus on the map, I can use this drop down here to focus on the locations for my jobs. I usually like to look at both the job and the location. And we can also create new jobs using the Create Job panel. This is the same Create Job panel that we used to create our illicit discharge request. A lot of the times, organizations prefer creating jobs for their users beforehand. So you can take away the ability to create work from other web users and centralize that with a project manager or a coordinator using the manage page. I can also view the job details that we saw on the work page to view all the information about the job. The job detail pane can be used to edit the job and also update some of the other priority status type on the job itself. Let's go ahead and do that. I just received word that job 14 needs to be put on hold. So I can do that by going to the holds tab here and adding a hold. Once a hold is added to the job, a user will not be able to run it. I can also add extra comments here to give more information about what type of hold it is. It could be because of budget constraint, resources, but holds are a good way to stop users from moving forward on a step. A manage page is a great way to keep track of all the work that your organization is working on in a centralized location. Back to you.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Arthy, for all of the great demos that you did for us today. The Manage page has some great features, and it offers production coordinators the ability to interact and manage the jobs that they have in the system. So for simpler reporting views of jobs, so maybe you have stakeholders that are not the GIS manager, maybe they don't go into Workflow Manager, but you have other people that need to know the progress or track different types of jobs in your system. It is possible to tie into the underlying feature layers to be able to build out dashboards and give simple separate heads-up displays of job activity. So some examples here. And this is all using the feature service, the jobs feature service view that was created. We didn't have to do anything new, didn't have to go in and build anything extra. It's just pulling the information, and this data will be updated as work is being completed in the system. So if you have these different dashboard views for different types of stakeholders or what they need to see, you're going to see those get updated as well. So just a recap of the selection set of key features that we presented today, and this is they are available to help you in creating your own work management system, building out your workflows, and being able to track the work. So you have tracking work location, controlling user access, and many, many more. We have a lot of exciting new initiatives coming up. So I'll give everyone just a few seconds before I switch it. And I just want to cover, we have it animated, okay. So right now, these are the highly anticipated features that we have available now. We have Workflow Manager coming in online shortly after UC ends. We have the job history in the web application that Arthy mentioned, and the integration with feature service webhooks. Not sure how many people are doing that, but it is pretty cool that we can set those up now. We'll be adding an import-export configuration functionality into the web application. So those workflows that you build in one workflow item and other configurations that you set, you're going to be able to export those out and import them into other workflow items or into a new environment. We're going to be building in more step templates to support offline editing workflows. So if you have people that have the need for that, we'll have several steps supporting that. We're also looking at being able to federate Workflow Manager with ArcGIS Enterprise and Kubernetes. And those are all coming up in our near term. Things that we are wanting to do and are looking into are going to be adding step escalation. So you might have noticed that there is a start and an end date that you can set for a job, but we also want to be able to give you the ability to set a duration for the step itself. So if somebody gets assigned a step in a job and they only have 30 days or 60 days to complete this step, we want you to be able to set that so it can send out notifications or start sending out whatever needs to happen to managers to let them know, like, hey, they're still sitting on this step and it's due. They need to have it finished. I don't know if there's feedback, sorry. And then field maps integration. I mentioned you can do feature service webhooks and you can set up the webhook receiver, but we're also looking at building in step templates that will work directly with field maps, and eventually getting Workflow Manager actually deployed in Kubernetes. So not just federating a Workflow Manager server with Enterprise and Kubernetes, but actually deploying Workflow Manager in Kubernetes. And then plans that we're looking into and that we really want to do or will be doing is the environmental promotion and webhook enhancements, additional integration points with other systems, and alternate workflow repository options that you can have available. And I don't think I ever hit the button, so sorry about that. There you go. So for resources, we have this QR code that has the list of links for everyone. We figured that's easier than having a full slide of links. And then I did mention that if you'd like to learn more about Workflow Manager here at the user conference, we have the configuration and deployments, which goes into detail about how to get started with Workflow Manager from installation to setup. And for the advanced users or those looking at that automation, we do have another automating your production processes session tomorrow. And also, if you would like some hands-on exposure, I don't know if this slide is in here. Yes, if you would like some hands-on exposure or talk to someone about a use case that you're thinking about, or you want to see what it would take or what you would start thinking about in designing that workflow, and if it's possible, we do have the Workflow Manager diagramming appointments that are available here. So you can always stop by our booth. They're doing that right over there. And that is all that I have for everyone. We have the feedback that you can share through the application. And thank you all for coming. Oh yeah, sorry, questions. Yes, sorry. Oh, I can, yes.
Okay, do we have any questions in the room?
Yes, sorry.
In the back.
In the back.
So this data, in order for that example where you pull from the job and opened up Pro and it went right to that location, does that need to be stored as a feature service? Because we still have our data in the SDE, and I know that doesn't work with Pro, right? But we can put the SDE data up as a hosted feature service, hosted feature service. So is that what you use to actually go to that data that you were looking at from the job?
So I'm going to repeat the question for folks online and for those in the room who didn't hear. The question is, in the example that Arthi showed where the Pro automatically zoomed to the location of that feature, does that feature need to be in a hosted feature service, or can that be stored in an SDE?
I can answer that one.
Sure.
Yeah, so for this one, it was actually published as a branch version feature service. So that's where the data was getting pulled from. The actual data is in an enterprise geodatabase, but it was published as a branch version feature service. And that's how Workflow Manager creates the version and automatically assigns it to that version.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it needs to be from a branch flow.
Yeah. For editing, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it only has to be branch versions for the feature service if you're going to use version, like if you're going to be versioning for your editing process. If you're doing simple data edits against default for your enterprise, then it doesn't have to be a branch version feature service. It can just be published as a feature service.
Okay, another question in the room?
Follow up on that. My understanding through Workflow Manager, you can no longer just an SDE with the database connection. You've got to have a public page service.
So the question was, with Workflow Manager today, can you access it directly through SDE, or do you need to have a feature service?
I can take that one. So we do not do direct connections to the enterprise geodatabase as far as the version management is concerned, or a data source on a workflow in Workflow Manager. But if you are going into Pro, like if you're editing in Pro, you can still utilize all Pro functionality. So you can have that data added or in your map from the enterprise, the direct connection to your enterprise geodatabase. Workflow Manager just won't be able to manage the versioning for you on that.
Okay, I've got a question online, and then I'll get to your question in the room. I'm actually getting multiple questions about our field applications, workforce. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I don't have a specific question because there are several of them that are somewhat in the same topic. If we want, what is our integration, or what are our plans for integrations with field maps, workforce, quick capture applications?
Yeah, so today you can actually, we have the send web request step, and you can interact with all of those now using the APIs. You can make web requests to create tasks, create jobs, or to check on the status of an existing work order or task in the field applications. For field maps specifically, we are working with that team to figure out what step-to-step template makes sense. But I think it would be creating those tasks would be one in particular that we're looking at. And similarly to quick capture, I'm not sure, like we haven't talked so much about quick capture, but from a workforce field maps perspective, that is just creating the new work and then being able to track the status or get the status for that. So it can go, Workflow Manager tasks it, they go and do their work, and then we can get that status and we can carry on with the rest of the job there.
Thank you. Your question? So the question was, is there a way to export the job history so that you can assess or analyze the amount of time taken to complete the job tasks?
Yes, so in that panel that Arthi showed in the web application, that's like the light version of the job history, and there is a button to expand that out, and there's an export to CSV button in that menu that opens up. Yep.
Okay, and a question down here?
Can we have jobs assigned to other users that are not part of our organization?
The question is, can we have jobs assigned to users that are not a part of our organization?
No, because they need to be able to sign in to actually run the steps, whether that's in Pro or that's in the web application. So it works against your named users in there.
So if we had a named user but was working for another company,
Yeah.
they would be able to?
Yes.
Online account?
If that's where your Workflow Manager is at, then yes. So we have Workflow Manager in Enterprise, so they would need to be an Enterprise user, but if it's an online, then they can be an online user.
Even
So if you have
Company A
contractors.
starts at Company B.
Correct.
Okay, I think you were next.
For the upcoming online deployment, I'm assuming that all of that work history, those jobs would cost storage credits. Is there any other credit impacts coming with that online deployment?
So the question is, in the upcoming ArcGIS Online deployment, there are going to be costs associated with storing the workflow information. Are there any other credit costs associated with the online release?
That's a good question. So no, as far as Workflow Manager is concerned, we are not charging credits for any actions. The data storage, yes, that will be normal credit consumption. The other thing that may add credits is if we put in a step template to run those analysis tools, then that would just incur normal credit consumption, whatever it would be to use those as well. But Workflow Manager itself is not adding any additional credit usage.
I had a question, gentleman over here.
In a large organization, can I have different managers that handle different jobs and the managers don't see the job of the other one?
So the question is, if I have a large organization, is it possible to have some managers be able to only see certain jobs and separate them in that way?
So there's two ways that you could do that. If all of your managers operate against the same type of jobs and you have a single workflow item that they all access and work in, then that would be done through the group sharing, and you'd be able to limit what types of jobs or what jobs they see based on the sharing. Almost everything that Arthi showed you in the settings has a sharing tab, and you can determine which groups can see those items. The other way is you could have multiple workflow items on a single implementation of Workflow Manager server. So before, when we say workflow item, that's essentially each item has its own workflow repository. In Classic, those each had to be their own individual enterprise geodatabases. Now you can have multiple workflow items on a single Workflow Manager server. So one manager and their team, if they truly are different, functionality functions, like they don't intermingle with each other's jobs, then they could have their own workflow items and manage them that way. And they can access and utilize all of the data, users, and everything from the same portal.
We're going to do, I think, one quick question online and then one more in the room. So the question online, do jobs have a one-to-one or one-to-many relationship with locations?
So a job is associated with a single location of interest. However, your location of interest can be a multi-part location.
Okay, and then we had one more in the room. I think you had one.
Yeah, is this interface with the hub? Like, is there some clean way of having a workflow manager show up to users in the hub?
So the question is, do we have any integration with the hub? Is there a clean way for users to view Workflow Manager through the hub?
So if you can embed an application in Hub, you can embed the work page or the manage page or whichever page, or I guess you could do the whole application, but you can do it by page as well. I know in Experience Builder, you definitely can. I've built it out so you have the work page there for people to access if you're already having a single user experience for people coming in to do work. But yeah, you would be able to embed those pages or that application there.
Okay, it looks like we do actually have time for one more question. We have a room.
I think there was one in the back.
Yeah, in the back.
In the back? Did someone have a question?
They might have.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question from online then. How can an external application be integrated with Workflow Manager?
Good question. So again, the send web request step and using the APIs available is how you can make requests or push data. Our send web request is pretty robust, and if you want to learn more about that step, the advanced session definitely goes into more of the details there. But you can post data, you can push data out to those systems. You can also request data from those systems, get that response, and use that response via Arcade in your job. So you can do different things with that as well. The other way is if you have geoprocessing services. So if you have custom tools that are looking at these other systems or doing things, you can publish those as geoprocessing services. And you can build those. We have a run GP service or run geoprocessing service step that you can build in as well.
Okay, and I guess the last question from online is about surveying. So Survey 123 integration. Will the Survey 123 information be available in the job pane?
Yes, we add the survey 123 table as an extended property table, and it's tied, it's linked using the global ID, and it pulls in all the information, and if it gets updated, you'll see that updated information in the table as well, or in that panel.
Okay, great.
All right. Now, that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.